Hello, this is Radio Mereb on FM 105.8 megahertz from Oslo. Notwithstanding Abiy and company's deliberate attempt to ignore or spin the bitter truth about the status of the war against the people of Tigray, there is ample evidence corroborating the claim that the Tigrayan people have turned a corner in their just struggle for their right to self-determination and dignity. Incidentally, we can observe that even Abiy's most ardent supporters on social media platforms could no longer hide that Abiy is losing bigger time. That's what we do. My guest today is the well-known journalist Martin Plaut, specializing in East African affairs. Mr. Martin Plaut, thank you for your time to start with.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. Well, as my introduction, I read your article recently that you have divided the Tigrayan war in 4 phases. And according to your article, we are obviously in the 4th phase. Can you say something about what is exactly happening in the 4th phase of the Tigrayan war?
Well, in the first phases, the Tigrayan defense forces were either on the defensive or going backwards. And then in June this year, they really, in an extraordinary period of 10 days, emerged from the areas that they'd been in, both the mountains and the hills, and swept away the Eritreans and the Ethiopians. And they forced them out of large sections of Tigray. I mean, there are parts of Tigray where there are still Eritrean forces right up in the north. Some of those areas, of course, were given to Eritrea by the Boundary Commission, so you could argue legitimately that they were Eritrea. But there are other areas which are not, and there certainly are Eritrean forces in parts of Tigray, particularly in the western part, and there are Tigrayan forces, apparently, that's certainly the reports, who've been integrated into the Ethiopian forces. But for the most part, what happened after that was that another phase really began, which was the offensive by the Tigrayans to try and end the blockade that trapped Tigray inside the Tigrayans inside Tigray. And you know much better than I do the immense suffering that this has engendered in the people of Tigray, and not being able to get any food in, the rations not being allowed in. As the UN has made clear, they need 100 trucks a day, and they're getting, if they're lucky, 100 trucks a week. In fact, in some weeks there's nothing coming in anymore. So the blockade is complete, and therefore the Tigrayan defense forces have had to try to find a way of fighting their way out of that stranglehold. And that is what they engaged in, beginning, what was it, last Thursday or Wednesday. And, they've made huge advances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how yesterday there were airstrikes in Mekelle. What is that exactly meant to? Was it meant to dampen the significance of this military victory that we are talking about, or is it an act of desperation? What exactly were the strikes aimed at yesterday? What have the international community known about it so far?
Well, I mean, the questions you ask are the right ones. The difficulty is to answer them. I mean, what is the significance of hitting what were pretty insubstantial targets, as far as I can see, on the outskirts of Mekelle? I think there were 3 civilians who were killed, some of them children. I mean, what is their role in the war? I mean, and why the Prime Minister of Ethiopia should send his warplanes into the skies above another capital is beyond me. I mean, why he isn't using them on the front line if he's really worried about his own troops and the Amhara forces who are fighting alongside him. then I would have expected him to, use them against troops instead of sending them against civilians. I mean, I think it's pretty pointless. And I agree with you. It smacks of desperation. But frankly, it's. I think we have to ask the Ethiopian Prime Minister what he's doing.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing that many Tagaru or Tigrans speak about is that historically the emperor had done almost the same thing, and it was a market day. The Derg military regime had bombarded the Mekelle 2, 3 times, and at least one of the strikes were in a market day. And again, now, well, it was a market day. It was Monday, and many say that it was deliberately done on Monday to cause maximum harm to civilians and not combatants. Can you see the resemblance of these three different regimes bombarding, in a market day? As to their motives, what can be said about it?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, there are parallels, that tragic parallels. I mean, it is, it does nothing to break the resistance of people. And one of the interesting comparisons, perhaps, let me use a European one. Hitler bombarded and tried to flatten London, where I'm living,
Yeah.
and the people of London resisted. They did not break. They stuck by their government, whom Hitler thought they would abandon him. And quite frankly, the British did the same to Berlin. They flattened large areas of Berlin, expecting the German people to break. They did not. So, frankly, unless you have something like nuclear weapons, which of course were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to appalling suffering, where the emperor finally thought he cannot allow this to happen to Tokyo, and he did give in. There is an ability of civilians to endure enormous sacrifices, and they do not break. So it is, frankly, a stupid tactic, if I might say so. It doesn't achieve what people think it will. But there are other parallels which are interesting. I mean, if you look at the current way that the Ethiopians are mobilizing ethnic militia and young people, and who've been swept up and let's be honest, there is a sense of patriotism that Prime Minister Abiy has been able to engender in ordinary Ethiopians, and they think that their motherland is being destroyed and they must go and fight for him and for their country. But this has been done before. In 1982, I'm sure some of your older listeners will remember the attempt to destroy the Eritrean stronghold of Nakfa in the war during the war that the Eritreans fought to liberate their country from Ethiopia. They threw 100,000, 120,000 people into that fight, and it got them nowhere. All that got was dead bodies. And now, obviously, I'm sure there are Tigrayan fighters who are dying now, and I'm sure there are large numbers of young recruits who've been given almost no training, who are on the Ethiopian and Amhara side, who are dying in very large numbers. And I mean, it is an absolute tragedy. I mean, what those families must be going through when they discover that their children have died. For what? This is a war with, for honestly, it's just immense suffering that is being unleashed on the people of Ethiopia, whether they're Tigrayans or Amhara or Roma or whoever they are. It's appalling.
Yeah. Well, obviously, for me, this is a violation of international humanitarian law, but it's also a continuation of the heinous crimes that were being done the whole since the Tigrayan war began. Well, where is the international community? What do we expect now after all these things at the end of people are expecting something at the end of this month from the United Nations, European Union, the Britain? What should we expect?
Well, I think that the people to. There was a very interesting press conference. I think it was yesterday by Josep Borrell, who is the European Union's. He's vice president and their main foreign policy person. And he gave a detailed analysis of what they're planning. He said that we are considering sanctions. We're waiting for the human rights report, which the United Nations is drawing up in consultation with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, as you know. And then they're going to decide what to do. Now, they have made preparations for sanctions, and they have made this clear to the Ethiopians. They are sending their senior representative to Addis Ababa. Whether Prime Minister Abiy is prepared to receive that person, I have no idea. He hasn't in the past, which I think is not very clever. The Americans, I think, are doing the same. I think there's a joint strategy between the United States and the European Union. How far they will go and who they will include in those sanctions, I cannot possibly, be sure of, because it is possible that they will also, in an attempt to be apparently even-handed, that they will sanction some Tigrayan leaders as well. On these grounds, that the Tigrayans have laid down certain preconditions for entering into talks, just as Prime Minister Abiy has. But while he has said that, oh, well, the Tigrayans are just terrorists, you can't talk to them, the Tigrayans are saying, yes, we will talk to them, but we're not so sure about a number of issues. I mean, we want to lift blockade and, we want to open talks. And they also aren't very sure about President Obasanjo of Nigeria as a mediator, because he was the one who endorsed the elections in Ethiopia, which frankly were, shall we say, at best dubious.
Yeah. I have one question also that's connected with the airstrikes in Mereb. Many of my listeners here, the listeners of Radio Mereb here in Oslo, wonder about one anecdote that there was that workers for aid agencies in Mereb were giving the heads up before the airstrikes, and they think they should have at least inform civilians to take cover and so on. Have you heard something about it, where there were aid agency workers before the bombardment that were in Mekelle and were told to depart? Have you heard something about this?
I've heard it as a rumor. I have absolutely no evidence for it whatsoever, and I have no idea. I can't comment on it, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Last but not least, what sort of scenario can we see now? The TDF is heading. We are hearing that there is war around Dese and in many other areas, in many other fronts too. Obviously, many say that Abiy Ahmed will never surrender to a negotiation. What sort of scenario do you foresee, Mr. Plaut?
Well, I think that, let's be honest. People who try to project the future are, let's be polite, are silly. We don't know what's going to happen. But, you asked me the question, so I'll try. But, as long as we have a clear health warning that this is, nobody ever knows what's going to happen. My guess is predicated on the fact that you do not win at the negotiating table what you haven't already won on the battlefield. So I would suggest that the fighting is more important than the talking, certainly at this stage. The other thing that one has to accept is that, I would think that that Prime Minister Abiy's position will be untenable if he loses this war. Very difficult for a leader to survive a major reversal like this. On the other hand, President Esayas, who is equally involved in the war and was involved in the war right from the beginning, and spent months plotting what he was going to do, he survived the border war in 1998 to 2000. So it is possible for leaders to survive a major setback unless the population resists and doesn't allow this to happen. So I'm sorry if that is a confused answer, but the situation is confusing. So I think that, in a nutshell, I think that Prime Minister Abiy's future is determined by this war. I mean, after all, it must be no Ethiopian officer who has sworn to protect the integrity of his own country can be, shall we say, happy about the idea of foreign troops, namely the Eritreans, all over his country, Eritrean security officers walking around Addis Ababa, making arrests in your own capital, and maintaining they're from another country. I mean, you've really become a sort of bit player in the region, and you're being pushed around by the Eritreans. I mean, where are the Ethiopian troops in Asmara? There aren't any. Or if they are, they're only moving in transit to go up to the front, which certainly probably happened before the war in November. And that was one of the things we heard a lot about, is that there were flights into Asmara to allow troops to go in to go south to reinforce the troops who came across the border after the 3rd and 4th of November. So, I think that Prime Minister Abiy's position will be very difficult if he loses. And at the moment, that looks as if it is happening. But, we can't be sure. It is possible that the Tigrayan Defense Forces, who have played this an amazingly strategic game so far, absolutely astonishing, that they will make mistakes, that they will be defeated. You cannot predict what is going to happen on the battlefield. Nobody can be sure that in advance that which side is going to win. At the moment, it looks as if the Tigrayan Defense Forces have the upper hand. They may not in the future. I am not going to predict which way this is going, but certainly the wind is in the sails of the powers in Mekelle, not in the sails of those in Addis Ababa at the moment. Beyond that, it's hard to predict.
Thank you, Mr. Martin Plaut, for your time. It was just a short interview based on the strikes in Mekelle. We just have to say, may the souls of the lives lost in Mekelle strike rest in peace, and thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.